As the cosmos connects the universe, water connects life. At the Cosmic Water Podcast, we're exploring the history, mythology, and future of the sacred land known as San Antonio.
Hello, welcome to Cosmic Water Podcast. I'm Maureen.
I'm Angela.
And today we are so honored to have Gary Perez and Matilde Torres with us. I'm going to read from a lawsuit against the city of San Antonio with y'all as the plaintiffs, which is just really incredible to read, and I feel like has everything in such a consolidated matter about what's going on at Brackenridge Park specifically. So in it says that plaintiffs and other groups indigenous to North and Central America believe the park is where life was created in the region. According to their beliefs, the park provides a special connection to the spiritual world. Plaintiffs and their fellow members of the Native American Church gather in the park for personal and communal religious worship, following the traditions that their ancestors have observed for thousands of years. The shape of the San Antonio River within the park, the flora that surrounds the river, the constellations in the sky above, these come together to form a pilgrimage site for indigenous persons across North America, and they form one of the holiest sites on Earth. So I went to UTSA. I graduated in 2010. And I moved back 6 years ago when I became a single mom. I only had one friend at the time. I actually met Angela the second day that I moved here, which seems just so meant to be. And since then, San Antonio just created the most incredible community for me. I say all the time, it's just treated me and my kids so well. And I've actually heard this from other single moms too, that came here and raised kids, and they're like, I knew something was special about this land. And so when Angela told me everything about the stars that, she learned from y'all, for me, it just all made sense. And I was like, yes, this truly is the most holy land on Earth. And with my knowledge of astrology and stuff, and with the way that Orion sits, right? The birth, which is the nursery of stars, where stars are born, just squirts, basically, kind of like water breaking into Iridinus. Sure. It's it feels like the birthplace of all of the universe to me. And so with that, that being one of the most incredible realizations of my life, and that information kind of coming from y'all, I was wondering at what moment did you realize that this is the most sacred place in not just on Earth, but in the universe? That's what it feels like.
Yes. Sacred space has always been contentious all over the world, in the Middle East, Mexico, here in Texas, because there's always a fight over interpretation and who gets to own it and who gets to create the narrative and blah, blah, blah. But we've known the shape of the river through Brackenridge Park has always been important because it mirrors the constellation in the sky. So as long as the river's been there and as long as the stars have been there, this has been the truth. And it's only in the last 4,000 years that the greater community, indigenous community of North America, has come together around this phenomenon, because it's directly attached to from Brackenridge Park, and a little bit further north is attached to the Blue Hole, an incarnate word, which is a star in the sky. And so this has been going on for a long, long time. And when I was caretaker of the peyote gardens for 12 years, I saw how other indigenous people that traveled from the north, some from the south, in this direction, knew that intuitively, or not intuitively, it was in their ceremonies. Sing songs, Yana wanted this, Yana wanted that. It was just, and in sitting in that position, it just envelops you. So there's a constant reinforcement, positive reinforcement from North American tribes as far away as Canada, that are telling you, hey man, this is Yanawana, this is the thing. They still travel further south to the gardens where I was at, and have their ceremonies there on our grandmother's property, but they never missed a chance to stop at the Blue Hole or at Brack, or watch the birds and reconnect ecologically, because that's a tenet. The water bird feathers and water, and a moment in time, and a start-stop station in our ceremonies is Yanawana, the water bird, the water, midnight water. It's a constant, and everyone uses it. Everyone, and some people know, some people don't. Some native tribes do know, some people don't. Some know and don't tell anybody that they know. Mm-hmm. It's really, it all depends on who it is you talk to and who's willing to share. But at the gardens where I was at, that came willingly through, because and the further away they had to travel, the more questions they had, Mm-hmm. And they would come and ask Gary, what is this phenomena? What is midnight water? What is morning water? And who was that first woman who found peyote all those thousands of years ago? And so we, in my office, immediately had answers to those questions, especially when someone traveled from so far away. So it's always been there. Mm-hmm. And when indigenous people or my peoples picked it up, that's thousands of years ago. It is, and it's recorded in the rock art out in West Texas. Yeah.
So for you, it's just always been innate.
It's always
inside.
been there. It's always been an inspiration. Always, it still is. It moves you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How was that for you, Matilde?
So I've been practicing for the last 15 years. Reconnecting with my roots and my culture. I started as a danzante, Mexica danzante. That was like, and I remember having velación and having ceremony in March at the Blue Hole. And I would say, like, what's the Blue Hole? Didn't know too much. And I was born and raised here in San Antonio, but there was always... there was not a connection, I guess, for me, because you feel disconnected because you know that your parents were born in Mexico, right? And so they, migrated back this way. When I wanted to know more about my roots, more about my culture. And so when I met Gary and I knew about his, he started teaching me about his work and the research. And for me, it just like, wait a minute here. You mean to say there's like, and I remember sitting at Brackenridge too, because we would work most of the time at the Whitty, and then we would go to Brack. And then I remember like, wait a minute, are you telling me this is a city of gods? Like we have that here? Like you're kidding me. I was, again, reconnecting with my roots, my culture, and I was kind of learning more about the pyramids in Mexico and so forth. Like, there was more of it, right? These alignments or how they're aligned. Or you hear the pyramids of Egypt, right? All the time. But it's like, what is here in Texas, And so when I began doing ceremonies, more of it, it just hit me all at once. What Yanawana meant, what spirit waters in the river and so forth. And just everything and not only that, but I think learning about what's in the White Shaman, right? This mural, it's like, wait a minute, and this is depicted, on this rock art, right? And there's just so much information. And so throughout the years, again, ceremony is what helped me ground myself more to San Antonio. And again, like you mentioned earlier, that it's a birthplace, right? And then you start making those connections to the other springs and these constellations and so forth. And I'm just like, oh my God, right? So you begin to see this story coming together, about the universe and about nature and how, this was all just put together again in this mural, And so I think that, or we know that our ancestors were all about nature and universe because that was their way of life. And for me to get to live that way or to know that we can still do it, I mean, it's mind-blowing for me, it's a lot,
When you talked about, like, I was born here in San Antonio and didn't know this, so many people that I talk to, and I try to, like, put this all together. I'm like, and Iridine is this, and the springs here, and the murals down in South Texas, and it's like, they're like, first they like think I'm crazy, and then I'll like bring up something that it seems like it just like makes sense for them, and they're like, whoa, like that's wild. I am born and raised here, and I never knew any of this. And yeah, you also mentioned the blue hole, and when you said that was a star, is that Regis or Regus?
No, that star is Fecta.
Fecta.
It's on the tail of Ursa Major. And when Iridinas is laying along the horizon, like it is in the picture here, and in our horizons, when Fecta, the star Fecta that represents the blue hole, it's just rising above the horizon. To the right of it, it's connected to, along the horizon, it's connected to the constellation of Leo. And the Leo is the cat, the cat, the blue panther that lives in the water, represented by the star to the left. To the right of that is the horizon, which is the surface of the water, Yanawana, and to the right of that is the constellation of Phoenix, which is the bird that flew into the blue hole and got chased out again. So it's that perfect alignment across our southern skies that tell the story that mirrors exactly what's happening on the Earth.
Is that what's in the White Shaman mural?
Iridinas, yes, Iridinas is in the White Shaman mural.
All of it is?
All of it is in there, in different.
I'm gonna go back to it. You can keep talking.
Yeah, it's not laid out perfectly because they used abstract to protect some of this information. It's very guarded. A lot of this information, you have to know how to unlock the key to what it is that you're looking at. So you can pause it there. That's a good one.
The springs.
Yeah.
Because it can show the connection of Yanawana with those.
It'll go to the image.
With the 4 springs.
You see how the arrows are pointing? If you've seen this one, the arrows are pointing to geographic locations in Texas. And if you're standing in front of the painting and you look to your left, where the sun is rising on the left, that's San Angelo. Slightly to the right is Paint Rock, the slain deer. And then all the way across Texas, from north to south, and then you'll come on to the springs along I-35, along the Balcones Escarpment. It was all laid out perfectly. And this was our geologist who did this. Our geologist made this discovery. I didn't. So he was able to put himself in one spot in front of the painting and close his eyes and imagine the Texas landscape in front of him if he could see it without, And so, so we know that the southernmost spring on the right, the southernmost area in the painting is Fecta, star Fecta, and to the left of that big globular thing, where everything else emanating, that's the constellation of Iridinas. And then to the right of that, where the deer is to the right, is those 9 lobes, those 9 right here in this region right here. Those 9 that's jaguar, that's panther. That's Leo. So it's all laid out in the painting that way, but that's just as a little subset of the entire painting. I mean, San Antonio is unique onto its creation story, but it only tells us that story only represents the region locally. It doesn't do the whole thing the way the White Shaman mural does.
Oh, wow. There's much more to it.
Oh.
Yeah, I think when I was researching, it said that it has like the most murals maybe in all of America.
That area has
that
more,
whole area.
That whole area, the Lower Pecos region. I would say that this painting was someone's dissertation. This puts all of that rock art together and puts it all in one paper, right? And then submitted for a PhD. So it's a magnificent piece of work.
It's multiple stories. Right? And information on there.
The multiple stories you're talking about came out of its foundation. Like the first woman who found peyote, she's in there she's represented in the painting as the Nueces River. So that's one story. That's one story. And then there's the Blue Panther over here. That's another story. And then in the Huichol tradition, the Nueces River and the woman's face along the Nueces River, where she has her open mouth, there are three ancestors in the painting that she has swallowed, and the two that survived in the Huichol culture. Well, it was the two that she didn't manage to swallow that killed her in the underworld. So that's a part of the painting too. And that's Huichol, and that's like 300-400 miles away. So I mean, a lot of folks, different native peoples from here, everywhere, pulled something from this. And over time, these narratives started coming about because of maybe nature change. We know that in 536 AD, the sun went away for about a year, and cultures all over the world suffered from this, including our own cultures here. It does show there's geological evidence that something went down here in the state of Texas, and it was a very unhappy time. And a lot of people moved away from this region, north and south, which explains the Comanches, Uto-Aztecan-speaking peoples in the north, and Aztecs, Uto-Aztecan-speaking peoples in the south. So you can see there was just this great exodus out of this region. And these cultures were gone for a long, long time until someone came along and picked it right back up again.
Could you please tell us the origin story again, and translate it to the cosmos, the blue hole origin story?
Okay, so one day a water bird flew into the blue hole there at the Incarnate Word campus and encountered the blue panther. And the panther roared in the water at the bluebird, and the bluebird turned back around again, swam to the surface, leaped out of the water, and left water droplets all throughout this region as it was escaping. And that's how life came to be in this region. And so we know that relationship between everything that I just told you has something analogous in the sky. The blue hole is Specta. The panther is the constellation of Leo. The surface of the water is Yanawana. And the water bird is the constellation of Phoenix. Over to the right of Phoenix is kind of funny, is another constellation that's a fish. So even though it doesn't mention it in the story, we know that because there's a constellation of, I don't remember what it's called, but it's a fish, and it looks like a
Sunfish.
It looks like a Texas sunfish. This everything, everything. So we do know that the water bird was hungry. We know that there was a motivation behind the water bird's behavior to go into the blue hole in the first place, because of that constellation still further to the right of the constellation of Phoenix. So you can add more to the story because there are surrounding constellations that give you hints as to the motivation of the bird, the motivation of the panther to roar, which is the Leonid's meteor shower. Leonid's meteor shower. And
when does that occur?
In November. In November. And when all of those stars line up on the horizon in November, right when they line up in November, as Leo is coming up, the meteor shower is blasting out of its mouth as it's rising in the east. So it plays itself out like a film, like a short
story,
like a short film story, in the stars in the sky. What really gives this whole story momentum is that meteor shower, as it's rising, as it's coming out of Leo's mouth, as Leo is rising in the east in November, around the 22nd, 24th.
And that's when y'all would traditionally have a ceremony.
Yes, but it's also involved in other ceremonies too, not just here locally. That meteor shower is also used in Matilda's experience.
In moon dance?
Moon dance, yes. Which would take place or takes place in November, during the full moon. So I was a part of it for maybe 3 years. and we would have ceremony for 4 days, and we would fast for 4 days. So that's one of the things that I was able to make the connection, again, with ceremony and then what's taking place in the cosmos, and then apply it to, the ceremony. So I'm just like, wow, that's part of the story,
And is that a women's only
yes.
ceremony?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, men do take care of the fire, but they're not allowed to come close inside the circle where the women are having their ceremony. So we're all dressed up in white. And then, so, again, we do sweats before we go into the circle. And then once we come out of the circle, which is from sunset to sunrise, and then sunrise, we have another sweat. So, but we do fast. So, yeah, but it's beautiful. It's powerful. It's, yeah. Fast. I mean, when I first joined, it was just like, am I going to be able to fast for 4 days? How can you do that? But you actually can. You have to prepare yourself, mentally. But you can do it. Yeah. So.
And the fact that this meteor shower is taking place throughout this, it's taking place during and then most intensely in one particular part of the ceremony.
Mm-hmm.
That's motivation to keep you going.
Yeah.
These
and
things
so
really motivate you.
that's what also she gave me water bear for, like, I think my second year when I was there, and so that's what kind of motivated me to begin a water pilgrimage. That actually this year was my 4th year. So again, using the cosmos, telling the story, reconnecting, and just putting it all together, right? It puts you back into your ancestors' way of life, or walking in their footsteps, right? And so even though it's been said that these pilgrimage would start from north to south, from the Pancas or other pilgrimages that were taking place, but I said, well, for me, I want to begin here in San Antonio and then go to the other 3 springs, and that's, for me, it's kind of bringing it back from south to north, just kind of reconnecting and just bringing something back, right? And Angie's been a part of it for, she was part of it this year and last year. So, and again, it's giving back, something to the community, something that we haven't had, but to tell that story, right? And to actually use the cosmos and share that alignment. I don't post anything about it because it's a ceremony, it's sacred. And so you hear what's going on when you're there. And so I try not to, I try to I limit, the number of women, right? Because even that for me tells there's a sacred number that we're working with, right? And so that's kind of part of what I document, throughout the ceremonies as well. It's like, okay, what number is manifesting in this ceremony? And that's how you begin to make other connections. So that's another level of thinking for me as a woman, right? What I wanted to also share about Yanaguana and the river, as you mentioned, it's a birth, but for me, is more also about the rebirth, because of the birds. And then there's also the afterlife, so for me, it's in 3, it's the life, the death, and the afterlife, that at times we don't, we struggle learning just about life, right? But what about death, and what about the afterlife? And so for me, that's what the birds tell. They tell that story about the afterlife. So through water and everything.
I think that's what I feel most connected to, or what speaks to me immediately about all of this is the darkness, is the underworld part of it. That's where transformation happens. That's it's very feminine. And so, you know, the darkness, I feel comfortable there. It's the womb.
Right.
It's the womb. And so it's just, I love all the connections to that.
Right. And so you saying that, I mean, yeah, I love the darkness too. Right. But at some point you must leave that womb, right, to manifest, right? And so that's really what the white shaman is that's one of the things that I mentioned to Gary. But even though he's more of the science, right? But as women, we begin to see all this, right, about the transformation, the evolution, transformation, and manifestation. They all have to work together, right? And so that's part of what, kind of like what I see about this painting is it's a woman, right? It's the universe. And so, yeah, there's just so much levels in there, right? But like you said, I think that when we think about the underworld, it's not as we've been taught to look at the underworld, right? It's still beautiful in there.
There's sacredness.
Yeah,
there.
there's sacredness in there, right? And so, yeah. So for me, it's the same. You know, I love darkness, and that's where basically it begins, right? It begins, and so, and then from there, just everything else happens.
You can't see the light without dark. You
Exactly.
can't see the stars without that dark sky.
Well,
Exactly.
then that what y'all are talking about in a nerdy sort of way of
Let's
looking at it.
geek it out. Come on.
That's called liminal space. You don't know what's on the other side of that door until you open it or choose to come through it. You just don't know. Ceremonies like that. You begin with, you know, you're awake, maybe you're tired, you're thirsty, everyone's hasn't had medicine yet, you know, and it's that. And I remember in my 20s when I joined the Native American Church, I wasn't aware that there was a gap between my consciousness and then my consciousness after participating in the ceremony, smoking tobacco, eating peyote, that kind of thing. And that was deep, wide, liminal space. You know, it took a long time to get through, all night to get through that door. And when I came out on the other side, I was, I don't know, that much better off as a person or as a human being. I knew that immediately, that I had just gone through something very special. And so it's necessary. And the liminal space is necessary in our lives. We can't shy or hide from it. It challenges us to take that step forward, take that leap of faith, if you want to call it, and say, okay, I'm going to walk through this door no matter how frightened I am. I'm going to do it, and then you do it. And it's that space between when you say, I'm going to do it, and when you commit to it, that liminal space, that's really, really creeps a lot of people out. And for that reason, most people never get to know themselves spiritually or in other ways.
Yeah, I'm feeling like I get like emotional when you talk about specifically like the water and reconnecting with ancestry and stuff, and having the opportunities to do these ceremonies, because my ancestry is in Ireland, which was colonized by the English and had all of their information just kind of erased too, and they had these really deep connections with the water, and it's all lost now. And there are some like people trying to revive those connections and stuff. And so to be able to see on the land that I live at now, people whose ancestry is from this land reconnecting with that is just like so beautiful to me. And my children are, as far as I know, have ancestry around this region. I'm not exactly sure where. And so that's like, it feels like coming alive again, rebirthing, and that they get to be connected to that, hopefully early in their life is just really incredible to me. And it really makes like my heart just like feel really warm that they can't get that from my ancestry, but they can get it from here. And so I love that.
Especially from a cute story like a bird flying into the blue hole.
Right.
You know, I'm going to be doing a version of that for the Mission Library in October. And my students are going to be kiddos. And I've got to figure out a way how I'm going to do the the water bird flying in, splash, and the panther roar, and then all these other things to try and get that story across to them so that it inspires them, or it at least entertains them, and with truth, with facts. Yes, it's a cute story, but it also plays itself out in the stars, so you can see it throughout your life, playing itself over and over and over again, and that builds a lot of cultural sense of security in a person when you go back to the same spot again, which is why we return to the bend in the river the way we do. We're inspired by the movement of the stars and everything else around it to come back to the same spot so we can reconnect to that little person inside, or what our ancestors painted up on the wall.
Yeah, that too. Actually, I was thinking about that too with my ancestry, because I follow astrology. I know the stars very well as far as Greek and Romans created the constellations, right? But over the past few years, I'm really trying to like decolonize my mind and all that. I'm like, what did my Irish ancestors, how did they see the stars? And there's not a lot of information on that. And so that too has just been like amazing for me to see that like it's documented, the stars here as they were seen are documented, and that they're still being practiced outside of that Greek Roman astrology that our whole world basically follows, I guess, besides Eastern astrology. And so that too, I'm just like it, because it's really hard to see outside of that Western astrology way. And so that y'all are like bringing it to life is more of just this amazing rebirth, resurgence of actual true information outside of that colonized mindset.
Sure, or the stereotype, the indigenous stereotype we see so much in the media. But we all have that in common. The Greeks, the Egyptians, our native peoples here, we all saw the constellation of Leo as a cat.
Yeah.
The arrangements of stars as a cat. That's something we all had common all over the world. Or we spoke to one another over the hundreds or the thousands of years that we've occupied this earth. We've spoken to one another, said, hey, how do you see that? Well, over here we see it like this, or over here we see it like that. And I think the one thing we had most in common is Leo, the constellation of Orion, the hunter, which hunter-gatherers all over the world. And then Leo the cat, the lion, or even in Christianity, Christ is the lion. And the belt of Orion, the three pyramids in the Giza Plateau. So there may have been a conversation going on between us human beings all over the world 10,000 years ago about the same stuff, because everyone had their turn looking at the skies. Like Israel is 6 hours ahead of us. So they see the same skies that we do in Texas every day. Every day. They see them first.
And
and that's even through mythology. If you read mythology, I mean, that's what helped me learn more about this painting is mythology, is like what was taking place, just the mythology of, the sun and the moon and or what happened, right? It's telling that story. But when you see it come live, you're like, whoa, wait a minute here. So that's how I think you can make the connections of how other countries or other places told their story versus how we told the story, So just think that would help too. Mythology is just, it's helped me understand more of these stories of what's taking place, in the cosmos, with the sun and the moon and the planets and all of that, so.
And touching on the history of humans and knowledge sharing, we have the technology now to do our DNA. And in my DNA, I have no Asian DNA strands in there. Nothing. Nothing from Asia. So a lot of us did not come over the Bering Strait directly from Africa. You know,
That's very true.
and so you know, when I saw that,
Yeah. You
Yeah.
showed me that, and how Africa is actually pretty close to South America. Like, there's not that big of water distance
Right.
to
Right.
get
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
those places.
Yep. That helps a lot.
Yeah, and mythology wise, I like mythology because, like I tell my kids, I think that Greek and Roman mythology has colonized the world, and that we are all recreating those patterns, whether we like it or not, because they've been so ingrained into us. And so it's important to know what they are, because we're living them, and we're going to keep recreating those. And so I read Greek and Roman mythology to make sense out of the current world, or current like matrix that we're in, I guess. And as far as Eridanus goes, yeah, it's right here, being looked over as a constellation, as it was for the Greeks and the Romans. And the name Eridanus came from a river in Babylon.
That's right.
Right? And
Right.
and so, which was the birthplace of like civilization, of law, of code, of legal codes and stuff. And so that's pretty significant. I also read too that they were trying to find Eridanus, like as a river. They were like the Romans and Greeks, as they were colonizing the world, were trying to find this river with this loop, and they thought that they found it like in Italy or something. And so they just sort of like, yeah, we found the Constellation River. And I always tell that to people. I'm like, but it's here.
Right.
It was here the whole time, and they know it. Like, they know the sacredness of that river.
We've learned in our research that that the powers that be in Texas, they know it too, and they just don't want us to have access to that information, and it's in plain sight. It's in plain sight, and I guess they think they're being funny or cute by putting it out there openly, because they don't think that we know, or that we don't remember, but we do. We do know. We know. We're on to the fact that this information is out there, but we don't have access to it because they don't want us to have access to it. I've even been told I was going to do a presentation in a small municipality here in Texas a while back about one of those particular types of phenomena, and I got a phone call from the city manager telling me, don't you dare come to this town and tell everybody what it is that you have found. We don't want you to do that. You can do your presentation, but you may not reveal that truth or that fact. I said, sure. I won't mention it. But I knew right away, okay, they know. And they don't want anyone else to know.
There's that interpretation of Eridanus as being the bringer of wrath to his enemies. Do you remember that image?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's always given me hope. Inspired me.
You know, there's the hope. This last part of this conversation was about hope. And what our ancestors, the reason why our ancestors painted the White Shaman Mural is for the hope for the generations thereafter that would come later. It's hope. And then I've been told in our native communities, never take the hope away from the people. Always give them something to look forward to. You know, the pilgrimages through this region down to the gardens is hope for the next pilgrim, right? They're going to come down to the gardens, they're going to put down their prayers, pray about their grandma or somebody special. The way our ancestors painted the painting anticipating this year's annular eclipse over the missions, San Antonio missions, we have absolute proof that shows that our ancestors 300 years ago built these missions directly in the path of this eclipse.
Wow.
Absolute factual truth that you cannot walk away and ignore from. And so that's been offering myself and my community, the community that I am the chief of, giving us hope for that day when it comes. And there's a second one, a twin, 54 years later. So we got to build that hope in our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, you know, to be there for that moment too. So, yeah, hope is huge. Hope is very, very important.
Could you tell us how the missions are translated or mirrored in the skies?
Sure. The way that the missions are laid out along the river, let's just say looking westerly, because my people would have seen the layout from looking towards the west, because San Antonio is in some ways the west, the underworld, right? So Mission Espada, and then Mission San Juan, and then Mission San Jose, and then Mission Concepcion, and Mission Valero are analogous to Saturn, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, Mars.
All in that order?
All in that order, that exact same order. In the rock art, our ancestors are laid out along the painting. The original pilgrims to the first sunrise are 2 to the left of the Milky Way and 3 to the right. 2 ancestors in the east, 3 ancestors in the west, and the missions are laid out along the river the exact same way. 2 to the left of the river, 3 to the right. 2 in front doors facing the east, and 3 front doors facing the west. That's directly connected to the rock art, and in anticipation of the annular eclipse that's coming this year. And so one of the things that pointed directly to this eclipse, the second thing that pointed directly to this eclipse was a set of 15 paces just above the deer. Right here, there's 50, you can't see them in this picture, they're very faint, but there's 15 paces of the deer. On this month, on the 29th, you'll have a full moon, the complete full moon, 100%. And exactly 15 paces or days or phases of the moon later, you'll have a new moon and an annular eclipse. That's why we know, one way that we know that here's the annular eclipse here, upside down. Here's this like lobe, be the full moon, and then 15 days later to here is the annular eclipse.
And so you have the new moon right in that area too.
Yeah.
So you get a full moon to a new moon, right? And that's what gives you the eclipse, right? And then 15 days later after that eclipse, that solar eclipse, then you're going to get a lunar eclipse.
Somewhere around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this math applies to any annular eclipse anywhere in the world.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so that goes back to the talk that we're having about how our ancestors were sharing information with other peoples thousands of years ago. Information about, what's going on. I don't believe that Native Americans in North America, Central and South America, lived in a vacuum. There's just absolutely no way. Yeah. The world is too big, and our ancestors were too brilliant, to allow themselves for that to happen. It took the evolution of human beings to connect with other peoples around the world, to keep up with the times. But what's unique about Texas is that everything in Texas and the teachings that we have here are rooted in astronomy and geography and time, math. It's rooted here. And so when the Spanish came here, our ancestors were still living deliberately as hunter-gatherers to maintain that connection to the original source, the math. The math, space, time, sacred space, mountains, the temple of the sun, the temple of the moon, Iridinas, the 4 fountain springs along I-35. This was a foundation that our ancestors here in San Antonio still had been holding on to for thousands of years. I don't know if they were part of the Exodus in 536. They may have stayed and toughed it out. I don't know. Couldn't tell you. But this is where it all began. This is I can say this. I believe I can say this as a published author, that Mesoamerica had its beginnings in this region, in Texas.
Well, if you look at the Hemisphere 1968, their whole theme, going back to was called The Confluence of Civilizations.
I've never heard that before.
Yeah, it's all over Hemisphere Park. Remember we went to, there's this one little section by that stinky pool, under by Angela's family's tree. There's this whole little section of all of the people who like funded it and all of the participants from all over the world. And yeah, it's whole like the symbol's like some kind of like swirly circle, and it's the confluence of civilizations. That's what the tower was built for. And so I was like, oh, they know.
Well, they used to have what's interesting is that I think even in the 60s they still had the voladores from Pampantla, from Veracruz. They used to have that ceremony, right? And that's kind of where that's part of my heritage too, which is, from Puebla, the voladores de Papantla. So
what is that? Tell me.
It is so what they do is they cut down a tall tree.
The flying?
Yes, the flying, I guess there's 5 of them. And so...
surprise, there's 5 of them.
Yeah, there's 5, right? And so, they go up to the top and then they come flying down, So that, for me, it's interesting that they had that there, And for you mentioning that, that's very interesting, And again, just to hear a certain language, right? You make that connection, like, wait a minute here, the confluence of civilizations,
Of course.
And again, and that's one of the things that I always tell Gary, no, this was a civilization, it wasn't just people moving around here and there. We have to see ourselves that our ancestors were a civilization, right? And not just moving around. Or I have a problem with, I have to say, hunter-gathering or nomad people, because that's like not grounding our ancestors to the land, and then when you again, when I learn more about this mural and then I learn more about the land, I'm like, there's no way there was a civilization here, because everything that's been found, like all the artifacts, throughout the Alamos Basin and Incarnate Word and Brackenridge and the golf course. I mean, come on. These people were living here for hundreds of years. They weren't just not moving, passing through, I'm sorry, but I refuse to believe that. So for me, it's I feel and that it was a big civilization from, all the way down to either South America, Central Mexico, and North America. It was just all connected, But I think we just need I hope to see the next generation look more into the history, more into what people were here, and not just based on the 200, 300-year history that, they just want to stick to us, right? There's a lot more. And so, and again, because of the, this painting, tells us that, So for me, that's what, it's basically what it's telling me, or we should not disconnect ourselves anymore from, well, no, that's Mexico, or no, this is Texas, or whatever,
And maybe one day, I'll just to what she just said, maybe one day on Webster Dictionary, the translation of hunter-gatherer will become master of the universe.
We can just start making that shift now.
Yeah.
Get it in our minds and just
Instead
start
of the
using it.
negative connotation that it comes with Texas historians.
Yeah, because, I think about the Toltecs, the Toltecas, they were the masters of the universe, and so sometimes we think, oh, they were in Central Mexico. But no, I feel that they were here as well, just like the Olmecs, but they just want us to believe that we are not part of that DNA, and we are.
Yeah,
I think we are. I mean, looking at your tattoos, for me, I see Toltec, and if you look at some of the artifacts or some of the people that are at the Texas culture down in downtown. I mean, look at those artifacts. Look at the way those people were living at one time. Have you gone there?
The Institute of Texas
Yeah,
Cultures?
yeah. I mean, and they say, but a lot of those artifacts were found here in San Antonio, but they won't tell you that.
Which they're going to knock down.
Exactly. That's
To
what
put
I
an
hear.
arena. To put an arena. It's already got a name. Frost Arena.
Of course.
Yeah. And you know, speaking to this, it seems to me that a lot of, and I've spoken to you about this a little bit, the Eurocentric idea of civilizations has a lot to do with its impact on the land. And so if there's not visual impact on the land, they think there's nobody there, you know, nobody's doing anything, when really these peoples are living in harmony with it. So yeah, it has little impact on the land. And so
or no carbon footprint.
right, you know, leave no trace, or you know, and so that's another, hunter-gatherer gets that lumped into this idea that we're just out here, and then the Spanish came and thankfully taught us how to dig ditches or whatever and saved us.
Exactly.
You know?
No, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But the oldest acequias in San Antonio, we've learned,
Yeah.
are the ones that the Indians built before the Spanish arrived.
Indigenous.
They are right. They're underneath the ones that they're underneath the ones the Spanish put when they got here, and above that are the Germans after they got here. The earliest acequias in the New World are pre-Columbian in San Antonio.
Yeah, I believe it. One of the mind-blowing moments to me, information hearing that totally wiped out all of the colonized history I grew up learning, was that most of the highway systems in America are based off of indigenous trails.
Yes.
So it was very much a civilization.
Exactly.
And for me, that
Camino
goes.
Real.
Yeah, Camino Real, right? So the Camino Real is another thing that, you know, you look at it as you hear it on the David Orchard script as the Old People's Road, or you hear it as the Buffalo, Old Buffalo Road, or El Camino Real. You know, so there's different languages there, right? So, but again, that's what helps us is getting back to know that language, you know, that we don't use anymore, right? Or we don't speak that language anymore.
Or the narrative.
You know, the narrative. So, I mean, and that's one of the things that, I have my 12-year-old, and I remember him telling me 6-7 years ago, he must have been 5, and he says, "Mom, are we native?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "But we don't speak the language." And I said, "Yeah, you're right. You know, we don't." I said, "But what Mom's going to teach you is how to read the language, the first language." And he says, "Really?" He says, "Well, what is that?" And I was like, "I'm going to teach you how to read the stars. That's what I'm going to teach you.
Wow.
And the language of the land. That's where you're going to begin." You know, because I think at times, you know, we're trying, you know, and which is nothing wrong with it, trying to, you know, either trying to fit somewhere or trying to learn the language that we don't even know if that's a language. We just want to speak a language, right? And so I said, no, we're going to go back to the beginning. And so for me, it's as a mother, I have that responsibility, you know, to teach my boys. It's to get to know the stars, get to know that land, you know, and then we can say, now we can speak a language, you know.
That sums up everything that we created this podcast for, I feel like, right?
Yeah.
Of getting to know the language of the stars and the land, and how it all is interconnected, and how we need to know our history and to be able to create the future. I was wondering wondering about the future. I remember when the first story about Eridanus came out in the Express News, was that the first? It was a cover page, I think.
I think it was.
Right.
And Angela sent it to me, and I was so excited. I'm oh my gosh, people are going to understand now. And at the same time, I was is it going to get appropriated? And I was wondering if you have concerns about that.
I do. I'm going to speak directly to the language itself. Our ancestors' language, the way that my people see my relatives in Mexico and here, is very sacred because it comes from the cosmological worldview, right? So I know that there are language programs out there that are being offered that are our language in Texas. It is recorded in the Smithsonian out in Washington, D.C. And without the cosmology, that language is nearly useless unless you're going to use that language to talk about, honey, I'll be right back. I'm going to go to H-E-B and get a case of beer and a bag of bologna for dinner. Why, in my opinion, why bother with it if you're not going to use it to re-examine and understand the cosmological narrative? How did the universe begin? And here locally, or the bigger picture, the White Shaman Mural in Texas. The language should reflect the cosmological worldview, not everyday life. So when we use our language, we're singing directly to that star in the sky, directly to that meteor shower, directly to those ancestors. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Directly to that sunrise or that sunset. Not, I'll be right back.
Right.
So the language, the words are sacred themselves because they tell us more about, in my opinion, this is my opinion, they will tell us more about what was here before the Spanish arrived and wrote it down. Mm-hmm. Its meaning before it was colonized. So even our language, even though it's still in most ways intact at the Smithsonian, it's been colonized because a European wrote that, recorded what we were saying without asking us what it really meant to us. They were just trying to, record, write, oh, this is how they speak. These are the words that they use, But I'll bet you those who were recording our language never made the connection that we had between us and an annular eclipse. Mm-hmm. Not to mention the fact that there were at least 2 annular eclipses that took place over the state of Texas. Okay, an appearance of Halley's Comet over the state of Texas. And in nowhere in the historical record written by the conqueror does it mention those two annular eclipses and Halley's Comet. Nowhere. Why? Because they don't want us to connect to those things. They deliberately leave these fantastic phenomena that the Chinese wrote about, Europeans wrote about, but you get a historian here from the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries about what was going on, they won't say a damn thing about the annular eclipses or Halley's Comet. Nothing. Mm-hmm. That's where it all, you can see that's where it all began. The colonization is, don't talk about what they were looking up in the sky.
Yeah.
Don't tell them why they lined up along the Balcones Escarpment by the thousands. Just tell them that they were there. Don't tell them why they were there. Mm. Don't write that down, because they'll come back to the same spot again after we take it from them.
Yeah.
So I want to add to that because of what he mentioned about how we don't need to use that language, right? Like on our, daily base lives, but it just, for me, I thought about how some of federally recognized tribes, a lot of them are losing the language. It's not being passed on, right? So now it's something that they say, wait a minute here. We're losing the language. What's going on here? They've lost a lot of the elders in the community or in those federally recognized tribes. And so it just makes me think, is there a reason why this language is not being passed on? Again, because maybe that language had a lot to do with, again, the universe and the land. And if we don't know that, then that language is gone.
Language changes how you think.
Right, mm-hmm. Right. So exactly. So, and so for me, I had to say that because it's like hearing him and then what I just said. It's like, wait a minute here, maybe that's why. I don't know.
Here's one more
example. We don't go outside anymore to go watch the sunrise.
Yeah.
Really. And sometimes we think, people might look at it as, that's silly. Well, what's wrong with that? Every time I'm driving my son to school, every time I pick, I give, that's the first being that I give thanks to is that sunrise. you know, that creator, you know, or, you know, I always say, you know what, thank you, Father Creator, Mother Creator, for waking up this morning. And so those are things that I share with my son going to school. Did you say your prayer? You know, look at that sun and you give thanks, you know. And at times I think sometimes we think that's silly, but that's really how it began for me. You know, it's acknowledging that, you know, that way of life. You know, you don't have to go inside of a church to say thank you. You just got to walk outside your house nowadays and just do it, you know. And so, yeah.
I love that so much, because I see every morning when I drive my girls to school, I see the sun rising, and I don't like outwardly say a prayer, but I'm like, wow, isn't the sun beautiful today, girls? But that's such a wonderful thing to add to it. Let's give gratitude and starting that day with
Yeah,
prayer.
because, you know, you begin to understand, well, for me, you know, I speak for my experience, the colors.
Yes.
The colors of what the sun is at times. It's not always yellow as we
Yup.
think it is, right? Or even the sunset, you know, or even watching the moon rise when you said, oh, look at the moon, right? And so not all the time it's the same, you know, or it's not always rising in the same constellation.
It's amazing. It really does blow my mind.
So what we can't see, you know, in the morning with that sunrise, you can see it, you know, during sunset, you know, and that's how it mirrors, you know. And that's one of the things that I love is that when I learn more about, and basically it's observations, you know, because I think a lot of times it's, well, how did the people do it? You know, they didn't have telescopes, they didn't have this, they didn't have that, you know. But if we become more observant of shadow, of light, of these movements, right, and sunrise and sunset and so forth, then it becomes a pattern in your life. And so you begin to see, oh, okay, you know, I mean, I remember when I first watched Orion, it was like in October during Halloween, and I was, you know, taking my little one at the time in the stroller, and I was doing trick-or-treating just down the street, right, because he didn't care much for trick-or-treating. And so I took him, but when I looked and I saw Orion rise for the first time in my life, it was just like, whoa, what is that, you know? And so I began to pay more attention, you know, of Orion, you know? And so for me, I became the hunter, you know? I became the hunter of going after that knowledge, you know? And also even, I think as women, we feel that this is a man's world, right? That they are the only ones that can hold this knowledge. But as women, we can do it, right? By making these observations, that we can be the masters of the universe too, you know, and Mother Earth and so forth, right? I mean, just a number of things. And so when you begin to communicate, and you get those answers back from the universe or the land, it's beautiful. You know, it really is. And so I like to share that one time when I saw all 5 planets, and I think it must have been like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I walked outside because I heard that, you know, these 5 planets were going to be aligned, and I went outside, you know, you know, I'm going to go, I want to see that, you know. And I remember just pointing at every one of them, and I said, I want to know about you, about you, about you, and you, and you. And here I am, you know, I find myself knowing more about these ancestors, or as we know them as, you know, the Astrals, right? But really, you know, they're there, you know. And if you have that communication and you ask your ancestors to guide you and just, did you want to know? They're gonna let you know. We just have to be patient, you know, and just when that time comes, it's going to come, you know.
And I have to admit, tell the world that we've gotten as far as we have in this research because of her own discoveries in the rock art and her own understandings that led me to change my way of thinking in another direction and guided me to something new that I had no idea. So a woman can do it just as well as a man.
The balance of masculine
Exactly.
and feminine.
Yeah, the duality, right? Which you hear in the Mexica is Ansante o Matilde, right? And that's duality, you know, the feminine and the masculine, you know, and that's part of creation. You know, it's part of creation. You know,
need a man and a woman to procreate.
You need exactly. So, you know, so not just the feminine is about waters, because without the man, we can't be here, right? But without the woman, we can't be here. So it's got to work together, you know. And that's another thing about the painting that I love is, again, it's about masculine and feminine coming together. It's about creation, man.
Our ceremonies today, even today, the way that we observe our Native American church ceremonies is the masculine and the feminine coming together of the two. Of course, it has more, in the Native American church, there's more Christian things, you know, thrown in there too, which kind of makes the church almost dogmatic, Native American church dogmatic through Christianity, about the male and the female and the masculine and the feminine. But that's, I don't believe that that's what it's there for. Honestly, I don't believe that, because what brings, in the ceremony, what brings men in common with women is water. They are both responsible for bringing the water, both the man and the woman, in our Native American church ceremonies.
Yeah, I was just thinking about when you guys were, like, because I had asked, like, are you fearful of appropriation? And it just feels like all of that summed up to me, kind of the answer for that, even for me, when I get fearful of appropriation of all things political, is that it just comes down to us and us living in our authenticity. Like you were talking about language, and it's like, you know, you can use the language like the Smithsonian does, but it's disconnected. So that doesn't even really matter ultimately. What are you doing with it, you know? And like, how are you personally connecting with all of these patterns in the sky? And to me, it feels like doing that for our descendants. It's like, how am I creating these patterns so that my descendants ultimately are like really deeply connected? And so whether it's getting appropriated right now by entities or not, like, I'm just continuing to work towards what my descendants are going to inherit and how they can
That's always
continue.
been a struggle for me. And I learned early on with my research that most people didn't want to hear it because it's too hard. Some people wanted to own it because they wanted something for themselves. So I was always concerned about it. And what I wound up doing is just publishing academic papers. And sometimes I deliberately make this stuff so hard. The way I understand it, I'll break it up into pieces to where it's almost unrecognizable. Because some people just don't deserve because of what their intentions. I'm talking about the people who want to appropriate it and get it out there and saying, I'm the master of the universe now. That is so common in our cultures, a misappropriation of our cultures, Native American church, Indigenous cultures, anywhere. If you're not directly involved in the culture, in the community, with the language, with the cosmology, and you have no business having it in your possession. Unless, of course, you go, hey, and this happened to me. Hey, brother, elder, jefe, we want what you have. Will you teach us? That is appropriate. That is appropriate. That you come to the people who know. It doesn't matter. That's not me. I'm not the only one who knows these things. But you come to those folks humbly and say, Uncle or Grandpa, would you please show me where my place in the universe, please? Would you just give me a moment, a chance? And they'll give it to you.
Yeah, and that's your descendants knowing that information deeply. It's like you said, you make it complex so that other people might know bits and pieces, but like your descendants will know.
We'll tell them directly
all of that.
what it is. And, you know, and we're going to my presentation on September the 16th, this Saturday.
This coming Saturday.
Gives, for the Mission Indian descendants, gives pieces of that information. The academic portion of it is going to be shared academically in order to write a paper based on the why the missions were laid out the way they were, and how we know without a doubt that they were put in the path of this eclipse deliberately. I can't do that publicly, but I can give hints publicly, because there are people out there who will take it and run with it and say, hey, I told Gary that, or Gary, we taught that to Gary. I can't afford that.
Yeah.
When I want the information that's eventually published to be super accurate, like our ancestors would have said it, exactly using their thoughts and their words, their observations. This is how it is, because this is how the universe lays everything out. Not because I said so, but because this is how the universe lays it all out in front of you. All we did was follow the universe. We didn't come here and create these missions along this river because we thought we were being cute. Yeah, we were struggling to survive, but our ancestors learned about this universal law that we must live by. Otherwise, we don't know our place in the universe or where we belong in it. Very, very important.
Well, I'm so grateful for you guys to come and share your knowledge here and share time and space with us.
I feel like I have like 100 more questions, and I hope you guys might come back.
Yes.
Sure, of course. Want to thank you, ladies, for having us. This is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
It was y'all's information that really inspired this ultimately.
Yeah. Well, there's these 4 new moons right here. I think that they are in November. And invite us back on the day after this full moon, and we'll talk about it.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah.
All right. Till then.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I really feel like I could have kept going forever.